Welcome in, everyone. Episode number 2 of the Drop-In Show. I'm Bill Rohland, and my guest today, a guy that I've known for quite some time now, one of the funniest guys around, Danny Rouhier, joining me. He, of course, on 106.7 The Fan here in Washington, D.C. as the midday host, but got his start kind of doing stand-up stuff and some videos around the football team here in town. That's kind of how he got noticed, at least on the radio side of things. So, Danny, we get into your journey here as far as stand-up and comedy goes. First off, I want to thank you for taking time out. I know it's tough as a parent of 2 young kids to kind of pigeonhole stuff into your schedule, so I appreciate the time.
I'm happy to chat with you, dude, but apologies in advance to you and to your viewers. There was a 2-year-old right here. I mean, I'm going to move my hand. I just touched him now, so you're going to get interruptions. He's now got my headphones on. So we couldn't figure out anything better to do, so it's part of the show. But I appreciate you having me, man.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I mean, look, if he wants to chime in, it'll work out fine. It'll be no problem at all. I guess I want to start out. Obviously, you didn't take a usual route, I guess, to stand-up comedy. I mean, we talked to a first episode, a guy that you and I both know, and I know that you've worked with, Talib Bab, and he said he started out at 19 doing his first shows. I know you were in college. You went to GW. You had a regular kind of growing up thing in high school and stuff. What is it that kind of drew you towards even wanting to get up on the stage and even to try stand-up?
I always wanted to do something, and I didn't know what, right? I went to a private school in Northwest D.C., was on this kind of athletic track, went and was lucky enough to get a college scholarship to play baseball at GW that you mentioned. And in all of those steps, you didn't get out of line. And what I mean by that is there's nothing wrong with this, but it's like, you graduate and you go to one of the Ivy League schools, a couple small liberal arts schools, or, a couple state schools, right? I mean, it's a very limited track. And then you become a consultant, a doctor, a lawyer, or a commercial real estate broker if you play lacrosse. That's pretty much the list, right? You didn't do anything else. And I knew even back in high school, even middle school, I wanted to perform in some way, but I also knew that the drama kids, the guys that did plays, they didn't like me. They didn't care for me very, very much, and that feeling was kind of mutual. It was sort of a different thing. I didn't want to say someone else's lines. I didn't know that I wanted to do something of my own, but it was definitely not that. I didn't want to recite what some guy had written years ago. And I never found an outlet for it. It was stupid stuff like bus trips back from road weekends where I would do shtick on the microphone and impressions and stuff. And I would do stuff, all the way back starting like in 5th grade. I used to watch in living color. I would videotape it and then come in at recess and do the entire show for people, right? So I'm doing Homer the Clown and Fire Marshal Bell, like doing all that kind of stuff from back in the day. And I loved the attention. I loved performing. I just never found a good way to do it. It wasn't until years after college that I finally had the guts to go try. And that was my new drug as soon as I found it.
Well, do you remember your first time on stage? And not necessarily, obviously, the schoolyard playground, I think, is where all of us that got into this type of business, whether it was arguing with your buddies over sports or, reciting in living color, all of us had that one moment where we went, wow, I kind of like this attention. This is pretty fun. But do you remember your first time going up on stage and how many minutes did you do? What was it like? And at that point, good or bad, were you like, hey, I think I can do this?
Soho Tea and Coffee, open mic on a Monday, run by a guy named Paul Schorsch, who's, in and around D.C., was kind enough to throw me 5 minutes. And I was awful. But
do you remember the first joke you told?
Yes, I do. I do remember the first joke I told. It was, I've modified it a little bit over the years. It's actually still in my act, believe it or not. It was a joke about a woman that I worked with who had 2 different, very distinct phone voices. So she would answer the phone in this very professional tone, like, thanks so much for calling. Good afternoon. He sure is. I know the weather is hot outside. You take care. Boom, right? It was professional. One of her friends would call, and you could tell right away, because she was like, okay, what's up, girl? Let me tell you something about that man. He a trifling 0. You know what I'm trying to say to you? And it was like she had a Jekyll and Hyde persona. And so the joke went on too long and wasn't particularly well thought out or whatever, but I could sort of squeeze in a funny impression of my coworker, and it got a couple of chuckles. And so that moment of I had my own original idea, I got on stage, people didn't boo me or throw mayonnaise at me or hit me with tomato. You could see it's right there. It's daylight. I mean, people are sipping their coffee or tea, and they chuckled at me. I said, "That's it, right there. This is the thing that I have now found it." Because this is not a woe is me thing. It's just something that we go through, right? Where my identity for probably about 20 years, maybe not quite that, close to it, was I want to be a Major League Baseball player. Well, that's adorable. A lot of people want to. But, I get to college and I realized kind of midway through my senior year, this isn't going to happen. I'm not fast enough to be fast. I'm not big enough to be big. Decent college player, but that's going to be it. And then the day that they say no, I was told by a couple scouts to expect a call on the second day of the draft. Then when that didn't come, I got, a tryout here or there. The Phillies were going to sign me to be an organizational guy, basically to groom me to be a coach or just some jag that got to play in the sun for another couple seasons.
Right.
Then that call didn't come because, a couple of 15-year-old Dominican kids that they didn't think were going to signed, and they'd way rather have that prospect than zilch me, with very low ceiling. And so just like that overnight, you're not that thing that you were for so long. And trying to find something else to fill that void is not easy we look at the college athletes that make it to the pros, and that's who we deal with and we talk about. But there's a huge, overwhelming percentage, as being involved in college athletics, guys that don't make the pro ranks, and now you got to go be an insurance salesman or something like that. And it's a weird adjustment that I don't think we talk enough about. But for me, finding something new was hard, and I finally found it.
So when you get off the stage that first time, and again, it didn't go horrible, but you didn't slay for 15 minutes or 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it was.
Well, it wasn't a Comedy Central half hour.
What was the underlying motivation then to say, I'm going to keep going with this? Because let's face it, we all know open mics on a Monday night at some tea place, coffee place, they're not paying the bills. So you had to figure out a way to pay bills and continue to try to chase this other thing that you want to do.
Ignorance helps a lot in this genre, because you don't know what you don't know. I didn't realize at the time that getting laughs on a Monday night at Soho Tea and Coffee was completely insignificant. I didn't know that. I thought, nice, I'm one step away from being at the Improv. It's a couple things to break my way, but within a year I'll probably have an HBO special. But you just don't know anything. And I was walking around for a while, doing a show here that I go to Wiseacres in Tyson's Corner or, whatever open mics were around. And you become somebody after a little while that people are okay booking without rolling their eyes at you, if that makes any sense, right? Where it's like, oh, he's not going to ruin the show, which is a big threshold. I didn't even realize it at the time, but that's a big deal to kind of cross that line, right? And so I'm doing this, and then eventually I start inviting friends to the shows, and I'm making people that I know laugh, and I think I've arrived, I've made it, bring me my paid stuff. What I didn't realize was I was terrible. I was awful for the first 2 years, really. I had no mentor, no guidance, just sort of alone in the dark looking for light switches. And I stunk, and I didn't know that I stunk. So I know that wasn't exactly your question, but thinking that I was making progress when I wasn't actually helped me make progress, if that makes any sense. I think I'm moving forward when in reality I'm not doing anything. I'm just going to stupid open mics and entertaining my friends and telling dumb inside jokes on stage and stuff that doesn't matter. But I was getting on stage, which is the thing that you have to do. So I was getting better, even though I kind of overestimated how much, if that made sense.
So ignorance is bliss would kind of be the phrase there for it. When did you, after that period of time, because I know you went out on the road and you opened for some pretty big names, at different spots across the country. When did you realize then that, wow, that first 2 years I was really bad. Now I'm getting pretty good at this?
So it really took, again, we were all kind of in the wilderness. We didn't have an older group that liked us or cared for us. I'm saying I'll get to who I'm talking about in a second, but my group of guys that I started with, we sort of didn't know what we didn't know, as I kind of alluded to several times. There weren't like guys that were big brothers for us initially that said, no, you don't do it this way, or this is what to expect with this part of the business, or this is how you get road work, or this is how you make sure your headshots are right and your resume says this, and this is how to call a club and whatever. We just were kind of, going around and doing shows with each other, and we sort of didn't know that. what the big deal was. So what really helped was having a group of peers that are now, every one of us, almost to a man and woman, is making their living in entertainment in some way. Some more successful than others. Like on the low end, it's me in the top 10 radio market, doing okay, just treading water, right? My buddy Justin Slagle does mornings on 98 Rock in Baltimore. We started the same week. My pal Rory Scoble's been in a movie with Will Ferrell and Dimitri Martin and has a Comedy Central show. Aaron Jackson's a roving headliner. Jeff Mowers won an Emmy for writing for Stephen Colbert. No, it's John Oliver rather last week tonight. I could go on, but that's who we started with. And having these guys, so somebody would get something and you go, well, how did you do that? And okay, so you have to, you know what I mean? You start to get your ducks in a row and you sort of figure it out on your own. Having that peer group, both to challenge each other, to commiserate with each other after a bad show, to help write, just everything really, really helped you grow much more rapidly. It took a while for us all to kind of come together and be friends, but once that happened, that was a major, major deal, I think, for a lot of us to help break through.
In that, because you're same age, close enough to me that we can remember growing up and probably knew about, guys like Richard Pryor and then obviously Eddie on Saturday Night Live. I mean, all these guys, that's kind of the people that we saw growing up. And now I see that the guys that I'm kind of gravitating towards, and I guess it makes sense, are guys that are around our age, guys like Bert Kreischer, guys like Bill Burr. Obviously, Chappelle is kind of the same age as us. Who are some of the guys that when you're seeking stuff out and not necessarily want to try to – I'm not even going to say try to, emulate what they're doing on stage, but you just want to be entertained. Who are some of the people that you now seek out that you think are at the top of their game? And is it people in our age group?
Right. You named a couple. I mean, and it's interesting how it kind of works, right? The older class, I always think of it that way. That's sort of like not class in terms of socioeconomic, but that sort of age group or experience group sort of graduates from doing stand-up in clubs to theaters. Then they start getting in TV shows and movies. Then kind of the next group comes along, right? And so that next group, a bunch of guys I was in New York with, that sort of in that incubator, are now making big names for themselves. People that I was doing shows with on the regular, guys like Aziz Ansari, Pete Holmes, Kumail Nanjiani, Hannibal Buress, all these guys, mega talent, super hilarious. John Mulaney's another one, who you could see were different. They were special, right? And whether it was their magnetism, whether it was how funny they were, how well crafted everything was on stage, how polished they were, you could just tell that they weren't long for this level. They were going to get to move forward, right? So I see a lot of those guys. But what's different now after economic downturn in like 2008, right, where a bunch of guys that are doing movies get kicked back down to doing clubs and colleges and kind of our level again, and people being able to be a little more choosy with their own audience, right, because of the internet, you're seeing guys like Rogan and Bill Burr sort of stay in that lane. Now, Burr's still getting acting roles, right, and he's happy to do that, but he reaches his audience, every week with his podcast, and everywhere he goes, he's beloved, and rightfully so. He's a juggernaut, right? But he's like, whenever I feel like it, I'll do a theater. Yeah, I guess I'll do it. He's a miserable old cuss. But you name some of the guys, but the newer wave of, and there's James, the newer wave of comics that are being kind of cast, and this sounds like sour grapes from a awkward 40-something white guy, and it's not. I'm just sort of making an observation. What's happening now is there's a certain sort of caliber or class of the unique perspective, hipster, whatever kind of comic, right, that doesn't have the road chops, that didn't come up featuring driving 20 hours from Iowa to North Dakota to do a Tuesday night at a Bennigan's. They've been told since Jump Street how great they are. And there's a little bit less polish there. There's a little bit more, this is my Starkey observation. Oh, it's clever, but it's not maybe necessarily as sort of gut-bustingly funny as some of the other guys and gals were as they came up. I mean, I know it's a vast generalization, but it's definitely something I've noticed where if you turn on Comedy Central and look at a half hour, it's going to be, a hipster in tight jeans and glasses. We're sort of like, so I've noticed this about conservatives. And you're like, okay, I guess, good observation, sir or madam. But yeah, it's different.
how much, and we've talked about your young son James being there, you also have an older kid as well. How much did having kids change how you write or the jokes that you tell? Because I'm sure there are people out there that don't have kids and they hear, maybe, I don't want to use him as an example because he's brilliant, but you hear Gaffigan talks about his kids all the time. Kreischer uses his kids in his act all the time. And they do it in such a way that I think even if you don't have kids, you can kind of relate or understand. But I'm sure there's a segment of people out there when they're first going out to a club, maybe now they're in their late 20s, early 30s, don't have kids yet, and they hear somebody talking about changing a diaper or the babysitter, whatever, and they're like, I'm not there. How do you make that at least relevant to them on the point of they can understand where the joke is?
So you touched on something that's very important. I mean, there are certain comics, when you think of Seinfeld, for example, right, that can take the banal, take the pedestrian, the mundane, and say, you guys see this, but I see this, right? I see the third dimension. I see the cylinder. You guys just see a circle or whatever, right? And he's a master at that. And then there are other folks that are able to sort of take that risk and say, here's something weird about me. I bet you got something similar and make that relatable, right? So I'm going somewhere with this.
Yep.
There are universal shared experiences. We're all attracted to somebody. We're familiar with politics, we're familiar with race, religion. These sorts of things are easy fodder, and there's a million angles to them. There's a huge percentage of population that has kids. There's also a huge percentage that doesn't. So how do you make, that's a real challenge, is to make that accessible. I want to be funny to a 25-year-old that's got no plans on kids for a decade, as I am to a 55-year-old whose kids are now about to go off to college. That's not easy. That's a tightrope to walk. And the guys you touched on that could do it, it's really impressive to me. So, I could do a show, for example, in Bethesda for an older crowd. I mean, we're in the DC area, so it's a rich, affluent suburb. Of 61-year-old, everyone in the room's a parent, and we can all reminisce about these crazy kids keep me up at night, and they'll go, we get that, we understand. But like if I'm downtown DC, non-COVID times, at the Big Hunt at midnight on a Friday, everyone there is 23 years old. They have no idea what I'm talking about in all likelihood. So that's a tough line to walk. It has affected the way I've written because you write your experiences in your voice, and but making it accessible is actually a greater challenge than people might realize. It's a great question.
One of the things that you're known for on the radio show, and I can attest to this because it started out when you and I were doing nights, and you talked about it, one of the first jokes you ever written was an impression of somebody that you knew. You've now moved on and you do celebrities and everything else. At what point, and we talked earlier, you said, on the playground you're doing In Living Color. Is that when you figured out that, hey, you can do an impersonation of somebody? Because look, everybody can try to do a Walker. Everybody can try to do all, Pacino or anything else. And it's not necessarily in the voice. It's in the delivery. It's in the facial expressions, everything else. Now, I think you're one of the guys that can do voices that sound like the person that you're trying to do. But when did you kind of figure out, hey, this is an aspect that I can really use in my act or on the show or however you write to those type of things?
I think it was fifth grade, I would say, when I was 10 years old. And, when you're a kid, you're blessed with this blissful naivete of ignorance to think, sure, this mole on my leg is normal. Everyone's got one. And then you start to say, maybe they don't have one. You know what I mean? I get a bad example by me, but I just assumed, of course, everyone can impersonate their mom. Of course, everyone can impersonate and get mannerisms down and do sorts of things. And so I remember it was in a casual conversation with one of my classmates where I did, again, it's another Jim Carrey character, but I don't know if you remember, Venus de Milo, mess with these breasts, die like the rest. And I did that, and he was like, that sounds like that person. Right. And I was like, and that's special? That's different? That's crazy. And that's when it clicked. And I remember figuring out that, wait a minute, not everyone can do that. You're right. There's certain impersonations that are low-hanging fruit. Like everyone, wow, I'm doing this. Okay, you've done that too. Congratulations. Right. But there were two different kinds that I was sort of would try to do. One is sort of the photocopy, right? The Xerox of the person's voice, right? If you can do that, that's the path you do it. You don't think twice. The second is sort of that, what I think of more as an impressionism impression, where you take an element of somebody and blow it up so they know who you're doing, right? So Caliendo is a hero of mine, just because he's such a master at the impression and he's so good at nailing some of the ticks. But he basically did both when it came to someone like George W. Bush, for example, right? Because now people, when they're doing Bush, they're doing Caliendo's version of George W. Bush. Like, he didn't actually do exactly that, but he sounds like that, and you take that little smirk where
right.
you defy things and ifficate things, and you blow it up, and everyone's like, oh my God, that's so funny. So it takes, you know what I mean? So you take an element and make it huge, and that can be funny, or you do a Xerox, and when you can get both, it's uproarious. So I don't know if that answers your question. I kind of started to meander there a little bit.
No, yeah, I think absolutely it did, because you have to, again, as you said, everybody can do the Pacino, the Walker, those are the ones that are easy, that everybody does at the lunch table when they're hanging out with their friends, or whenever we get to go back to restaurants again, whenever that may be. But at some point, you've got to figure out that I'm pretty good at this, and you kind of pick and choose your spots to do people. Is there ever a worry? And yes. I know that, I was just is there ever a worry? And I know probably if you ever got, and I know you've done some of your impressions to the people that you're doing the impression of.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that can be a little nerve-wracking at times. But I also know that if you got a guy, because Charles Barkley is one of your best ones that you do, if Barkley ever came on your radio show, you would hate yourself if you didn't do Charles Barkley to Charles Barkley.
Right. It's a tough balance. So what people think sometimes is if you do an impression of somebody, it means you don't like them, right? For the most part, the folks that I impersonate, I'm agnostic, right? I do a Bush, I do an Obama, I do a Trump. I mean, there's nobody's spared. I'll do Clinton too. I mean, so I happen to like Charles Barkley a lot. I mean, I remember one of the first times I was kind of thrust into doing it for somebody was Caps play-by-play announcer John Walton, right? I do a John Walton impression. And so I had to make sure I explained to everybody, I like John Walton. He's a good dude. I think he's really good as a play-by-play man. Okay, now here's the impression. There have been some where I happen to impersonate somebody that I don't particularly care for. That's either here or there, right? But it's still nerve-wracking to do for the person, because they automatically assume, yeah, we're all making fun, we're having a good time, but they assume it's because there's venom behind it. Sometimes there is, but for the most part, it's just jokes. We're just having fun.
Yeah. Is there a celebrity, a politician, or anybody in particular that you wish you could get them down, but for some reason, whether it's their pattern, whether it's the way they sound, their manner, you just haven't been able to get it down to the point that you're comfortable putting it out there, whether it's on the radio or in your stand-up act? Is there that one kind of elusive ring, if you will, that you haven't been able to grasp?
There's so many, Bill, and this is something that happens, and this is true. And I like to think I try to make sure I remember that it is kind of flattering, okay? But what happens when you do impressions and you can do some voices is if you have one that may not be as good, but it's still better than 97% of the population, people feel very comfortable going, that's not that good. And you're like, thank you. But it also, I'm hoping that it means that it's not on par with some of your other work, or it's not on par with some of your other impressions, or whatever, right? But I mean, there are millions, especially because if there's so many that you can do, and you're like, this one should be in that Venn diagram. It should fall right in the middle, and you should be able to do it, but you just can't. Let me see if I can pull somebody. My Denzel stinks. My Denzel Washington stinks. So the guys that you see with Dean Edwards does a great one. There are a number of guys that can do the sort of talking like okay, all right, honest. It's awful. It's just like it's an impression of someone doing an impression of what, but I can't do it. I've tried. It should be right there. He doesn't have a super high tone voice. His voice isn't too deep. Is that Ving Rhames talking? but I just can't get it. I've never been able to get it. So that's one. That's a good example of one that like people just are look at you like, oh, you can't do that. Oh, okay. And they're crushed.
Let me ask you, with that, there's
Yep.
been a lot lately, and if you're not comfortable going down this road, I completely get it. I understand. You've got the job to protect and everything else.
Yep.
But in this latest, I would say past 6 months, year, maybe even longer than that, but really in the last 2 or 3 months, there's been this push that if you are not a person of color, you cannot voice act a person of color.
Wow, what do you mean? What's happened? What's been going on? I haven't.
When it comes to like, the Simpsons and the Cleveland Show and everything else. And I think, and I'll be honest with you, when all these stories started to break, you were the first person that I thought of, because I sat there and went, well, I hope this doesn't stop Danny from doing Barkley and other guys. I mean, I really did, because I thought, there's nothing harmful in this at all. As you said, most of the time, it's because you admire the person that you're impersonating, or you're at least a fan of them for the most part, in a lot of cases. But
who cares, right?
Right, exactly. So has this type of backlash, have you had to start thinking about, maybe I shouldn't do a Charles Barkley, maybe I shouldn't do this person, whatever it is? Because I know you can do Simpson characters as well. Do you sit there and go, I guess I shouldn't be doing those anymore?
Right. It's a great question. And so thankfully, I don't think we're there yet, but it would be naive to say we'll never get there. Right? If you would have told me, 6 months ago that Hank Azaria can't do Apu anymore, I go, well, that's kind of a shame. Or the guy from Family Guy that does Cleveland, it should not be a white guy. Oh no! Like, I'm of 2 months, and let me give it to you. I know I'm not trying to dodge your question. I'm answering. I think it's a very noble sentiment. I think it's a very nice sentiment. I get where it's coming from. Okay, the cynics may say it's a place of misplaced guilt, or just sort of some sort of virtue signal because you can afford to do it. Fine, be as cynical as you want to be. That's cool. I think it comes from a very good place, right? It's a desire to attempt to do some good, at least on some level. Okay, so I understand that sentiment, but I also happen to think it's a little bit silly, because where does the line stop? And here's what I mean. In order to play a person with a disability, do you have to have a disability? In order for, if in order to have played a member of the military, do you have to have been in the military? In order to, you see what I mean? Like, actors can take on different personas. That's what makes you an actor, and that's wonderful. So the sentiment is good, and the execution, we may be scratching our heads a little bit and go, man, how did we get here? We're going to paint ourselves in a little bit of a corner. So if someone wants to relinquish a role for whatever reason, relinquish a role. Nobody's forcing you to do anything. I mean, it's still a free country in that way. But if it turns into policing others who are just, doing an impression here or there or something like that, that's nonsense to me. That's silly. That's sort of prior restraint type censorship, which is the type of thing we should just always seek to avoid as a pretty big free speech advocate, including some that I don't like, by the way. I want to make sure we can, if someone wants to impersonate me, not that anyone care about me, I'm not a celebrity, but if somebody does, I don't want that canceled simply because it makes me uncomfortable, or they put on like a Michelin Man suit and they're like, my opinion's important. I don't want to cancel that as much as it might tick me off, but I don't know. I hope that answers the question,
No, it does. And I want to follow it up. And I asked Talib about this as well. And I'm sure I'll get people that are saying, oh, you're just recycling questions. But to be honest with you, I think it's interesting to get.
I think it's a huge question. It's huge, man.
Yeah. And Talib being a younger guy, he's not even 30 yet. And you and I are both in our 40s now, as much as we don't want to admit that, but we are. How do you answer to people? And I don't think you necessarily have it as tough, because your radio show doesn't dive into a lot of the controversial stuff. I talked to Talib about him writing for or helping with the Colbert Show and doing stand-up. He's out there a little bit more as far as touching that third rail or the edgy stuff than necessarily you may be. But how do you respond to people when it comes to, and I hate this phrase, but it's one that everybody uses, the cancel culture stuff, where it's like, oh, sorry, white guy, you're not allowed to do that anymore. Oh, you can't talk about that because you don't have that experience. So no, we're not listening to you. How do you avoid, And Talib and I talked about it as, look, if I don't like a comedian, I don't watch that comedian. I don't seek them out. I don't try to look at their special. I'm not going to buy a ticket to their show. But I don't care if you want to pack it in with 5,000 other people that love you. Awesome. That's what America's about. You found a niche. You can make your living. But I'm not going to tell you you can't do it. And I don't want you telling me I shouldn't listen to these comedians as well. So as a comedian, how do you fall in line to avoid falling into that trap of, oh, shoot, I don't want to write this joke because somebody's going to then come after me?
I don't know. I don't have a good answer
fair.
for it. Honestly, I mean, I will tell you this. My Twitter account is nowhere near what it should be, but I'm just afraid to get fired. I'm afraid of someone taking something out of context. And, you know, it's far more pedestrian than if I didn't have the radio gig. I would make fun of everybody because that's what we're supposed to be doing as comics, speaking truth to power and making light of situations, right? I mean, I remember years ago during, you know, Republican debates, I'm making fun of everybody. I was making fun of there was that piece of food on Ted Cruz's lip, you know, and I invented a persona and gave it a backstory. Then the Democratic debate, I'm making fun because Eric Swalwell, I think the guy's name is, looks like the dude from Stand By Me. You know, like I'm just
right.
I make fun of everybody. I don't care. Like it should be fun. It should be fun. But people get butt hurt and all bent out of shape and whatever. So my answer unequivocally is cancel culture sucks. It stunk when Tipper Gore tried to get Grand Theft Auto banned. It stunk when the people clutch their pearls about gangster rap. It stinks now that it's switched sides, and anybody that says something problematic for the ever-moving goalposts about what's acceptable not only shouldn't say that, but has to lose their livelihood. It sucks. It's unequivocally bad. It's horrible. And what happened during a very sensitive time was borderline struggle sessions for people to be sort of browbeaten into thinking along the lines of an angry mob. That should terrify people, and it doesn't, because it's under the guise of being sort of being accepting and being tolerant, etc. Even though it's the least tolerant thing we've ever seen in this country, right, when we're limiting speech. So I guess my answer is I do live in fear of it. I mean, it's my number one source of anxiety every day. And instead of being able to just speak plainly, we have to couch things a certain way, offer 2.5 minute long qualifiers, and then we can actually get to our point. I think it limits real dialogue. I think it limits provocative and or productive conversation. It's very easy now for some, let's take of argument, some journalist is at a comedy club. You've entered the comedy club voluntarily. You haven't been cuffed and stuffed, and perp walked into the comedy club. And you quote tweet somebody's line, right? Where whatever it is out of context. Then here comes the outrage. Let's cancel this person. What about that seems right? Yeah. Like let's say the topic is problematic. I've seen Ricky Gervais, one of my heroes, joke about childhood cancer. I've seen him joke about the Holocaust. I've seen him joke about everything in between, and I'm telling you, it's uproariously funny. Check his HBO special out. It's amazing. So if you just go, you can't joke about that, watch me. Now, the other side of that, I want to make sure I say this, are comics that try purposely to be edgy, to say something that isn't funny, because the only thing that matters is it funny or not. If you say something that's not funny, but it's about that topic, and you sort of hide behind the no, you just can't handle it because it's this sort of thing, and I'm just edgy. Okay, that's cool. You're still allowed to say that, but you also should be open to criticism about the fact that whether it was funny or not. The only thing that should matter is it funny? And what people want to do is only have things that they like or approve of filter to them, and we have to protect feelings. And nowhere is that written anywhere in terms of law or documentation that anybody has to protect your precious feelings.
And I think that's a great point, because again, it goes back to, if I don't think it's funny, okay, I heard the joke, maybe I was on Comedy Central, whatever. Exactly. I'm just going to flip and say, not for me. Maybe next time I'll try it again. Maybe I just didn't like that set that you did, but I might come back to it, or I might never, ever listen to you again. But if you find your audience, hey man, you found your audience. That is what it is. The open market will take care, I think, of people that aren't necessarily writing good jokes. Like you said, Gervais, I mean, I think one of the best things that he did outside, again, that special is amazing, but I think it was when he hosted, was it the Oscars or the Golden Globes?
No, yeah. So it's the last one. I don't care. I don't care. And he's just taking
for 9 minutes
to everybody.
Just mowed everybody down. And the reaction from the audience, the celebrities, to me is the best part, because millions of people at home are like, oh my God, this is the same stuff me and my buddies say about them. Not as funny, but the same stuff we say about them at the lunch table. He's killing them and they can't stand it.
And the in the room this is next level. We're gonna talk about this for a second. For a comedian, okay, even the boldest among us, go back to Pryor, Chris Rock, the guys that didn't care. Chappelle needs to be mentioned in this group as well. They still, no matter what, will play to the room, right? That is, it's human nature. The people that you can see, you try to get laughs from this group. To have the Stones, I'm talking about the megawatt, giant totems in your pantaloons, to not play to the room, to know that they're cringing, but a bunch of dudes like me are at home smacking their knee and whooping and hollering because Ronan Farrow's coming for all of you. I know you're friends with Epstein. I don't care. I don't care. You're just losing it. And they're going, I hate this. I want it gone. It's the greatest. That's so hard to do.
By the way, it's a very good Gervais. I hope you have that in your repertoire. Last thing for you, and again, I appreciate taking all the time because I know you're busy again with James and the kids and everything. So I appreciate you taking time out. Everything going on with COVID.
Yeah.
There's going to be, and I'm not the first person to say this, guys that are doing stand-up have said this, that they are dreading the day that they can get back to the comedy shows, because there are going to be hundreds of comics that are out there talking about, boy, that COVID thing, that was wild, huh? How tough is it going to be to avoid making those jokes, and how much you're going to cringe when inevitably there are going to be those comics that will be their first 5 minutes of their 10-minute set?
It's honestly like towards the bottom of things I'm really and truly worried about. And I understand the point, and it's a good one, but like, I'll just be so happy to be on stage. I'll be skipping blissfully through life, man. The idea that I can tell jokes. I mean, you're going to hear I fell in love with a woman when I only saw her eyes because of the mask. I mean, you're going to hear a billion of those things. And bring them on is what I say. To me, that's the tax. It's a small price to pay for us to be out and about again and have kids like this able to go to school one day. Remember schools, by the way? It's what they were doing when we were working.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, it's true. You're going to see the same, sort of hack, recycle things. But at the same time, think about this. You know this from doing radio. Are you bored, buddy? You got bored? Think about it from radio. How many times did we have to talk about the same things with the local football team, right? But it's what people expect to hear. When people go to a comedy show, you're trying to establish a bridge of commonality. What does everyone just live through? The pandemic and the lockdowns. So I get it, and I'm going to be sick of those jokes after an hour. Ask me again in 10 months whenever we get back out and do stuff again. But you're right. It's going to be a pain, but at the same time, I'd rather be tired of something than I would be not being able to do it like now. And it's just me on a Zoom conference in front of 8 people, getting paid $23.
How tough has this been to kind of keep yourself sharp when you can't go out and get on stage, or you can't go out and write with people or whatever it is? Because I know, are you guys still doing the show from the house?
Yeah.
Are you going back to the studio? Yes. I mean, you're not even able to collaborate face-to-face. Yes, you can do it over conference calls or Zoom or whatever. It's not the same as being in a room and kicking stuff around with people. It's just not. So how tough has this been?
Really tough. And I'm already limited anyway as it is, just because of I'm blessed to have it. It's not a complaint. But because of the sports gig, where I'm watching the Nats every night, the Wizards every night, the Capitals, reading every article that you can, dealing with my 2 young children, and by the time that's all done, it's like I'm not going out to an open mic because they started 3 hours ago, and I'm exhausted. Basically, so I've been kind of in a static period for a while. Before all this happened, I still had enough where I could stay sharp and you could write a little bit and get in that rhythm. But there's nothing that replaces. I mean, I'm thinking of being in when I was in New York with all my buddies, guys that are now doing much better than me. But it was every night you're on stage. Every night you're living it, breathing it, and this guy's got a tag for you, and what if you did it this way? And you're watching each other's sets, and I love this new one. He's got this great new bit. Did you hear this? What if you did that? And you can't help but just be in that groove. And when you're not in it, it's really tough to get in the headspace to not be performing and then still coming up with new material to perform. You know what I mean? And so you touched on it. Doing a Zoom show, I appreciate everybody trying. I'm glad people are trying to do something that makes them feel good. And I appreciate audience members that much more opting in. It's just not the same. It's not even close. There's no greater divide between being in a room, a comedy club with a low ceiling that's too hot and it's humid in there, and you are just ripping through an audience, and they love you and you love them, and that live, instantaneous adrenaline that we all feel, right? Because they're nervous that it's not going to go well. So are you. And then when it does, it's like this great burst, and it's better than any drug in the world. That's not the same as chatting on Zoom. You're just not,
right?
Man. You can't do it.
All right, promote what you got. I know, obviously, no stand-up dates or anything coming out, but where can they find? I know you're doing a new podcast yourself, so please, pimp away.
So normally 10 a.m., 2 p.m., Grant and Danny, 106.7 The Fan, which is just, we're chugging along. There's some sports now to talk about, which is good, and they were kind of letting me start a new venture. It's a podcast called You Seem Interesting, and what I do each week is I learn about a topic. And that topic is based on who the guest is. So I'll interview somebody with a really unique job or that's been through something crazy, et cetera. So I've had, Mary Bruce, who covers Congress for ABC News. Nationally, I've had Dan Diamond, who covers healthcare for Politico. I've had a brewmaster. I've had a seafood sustainability expert, just a bunch, just kind of all walks of life. Sort of represented there. So I'll learn about beer. I'll learn about seafood one week. And so it's fun for me to kind of dig and grow that. But podcasts are all available. There's a Patreon page if you want to contribute. That's awesome. But for the most part, you can find it on Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, all that kind of stuff. And we always want likes and subscriptions, man. But yeah, I appreciate you letting me plug that.
Yeah, no problem. It sounds like an intelligent version of Mike Rowe's Dirty Jobs, to be honest with you. I mean, it sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's a lot like that, honestly. I mean, this week, the episode just went up, patreon.com/funnydanny. I talked to a guy named Perry Wilson, who is a associate professor of medicine at Yale University Medical School. He's also got a master's degree, just a total loser, this guy. He's also got a master's degree in some kind of epidemiology, but it's like a certain phrase of epidemiology that I don't understand. But we talked about COVID. We talked about how do we get schools open. We talked about
nice.
Right, stuff like that. I mean, I've had a guy that designed video games on. I've had everybody in between. So, it's been a lot of fun to be able to pursue.
Well, definitely, hopefully people will check that out. I know I've caught a couple of episodes. I found them fascinating as well because, again, it's just stuff that you don't think about necessarily listening to, but you go, why not? Let's see what we can find out. So, yeah,
that's the selling point for me is why not, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what it is because you never think about that kind of stuff, though. That to me, talking to a guy like you just talked to it, I haven't heard the latest one yet. I haven't got to that one, but that's something that you would do if you're hanging out, listening with like your NPR friends. Mm-hmm. That probably most of us would be like, roll our eyes and go, you serious? We're gonna listen to this. But I think the way you do it and the way you present it, it's that curiosity factor of you're not necessarily talking down to the people that you're listening to, like, hey, look how smart I am. I'm talking to this guy from Harvard. You guys are a bunch of idiots. That's why you're listening. It's more of, hey, I know what I don't know, but you know what I don't know. Help me out. That's the kind of feeling that I got from it.
Thank you. Yeah, the idea was, and that's kind of the idea was that, hey, let's learn about this together. I mean, I didn't know before I started Googling. My favorite episode, honestly, that we've done was with a guy that I went to high school with named Bart Seaver, who started out with Jose Andres at Yaleo in BC and is part of the kitchen. And he's gone on he ran his own restaurants a couple times, and he left all that to basically be this sustainability expert, right? And he now lives in Maine, and he wants, and learning about seafood sustainability was the most fascinating thing, because who's against seafood sustainability? Like what cartoon villain is like, no, let the fish die? And like everybody wants the same thing, but there's a difference between salmon caught in Alaska and salmon caught off the eastern seaboard. One is bad, one is good. There's a difference between cod or this kind of rockfish is good, but no one knows what's sustainable. Is it wild caught? Sometimes. Is it farm caught? Sometimes. Nobody knows. And I had no idea about that world. And I can't imagine a regular consumer going to Whole Foods being like, Arctic char, done, all right? Did I help or hurt the environment? Nobody knows.
Right, perfect. Well, we'll put all that, again, down in the description. Again, Danny, I appreciate the time, man. This went way longer than I know I told you it would be, but I've had a great time talking to you. I've got a whole list of more questions that I can throw at you, but I don't want to do that because I know you got the kids and everything else. So I appreciate you taking the time out.
My pleasure. It's good to catch up. And the reason you didn't get to those questions is because your pal is very verbose, and that's on me. So I'm sorry, dude.
No, it's fun. We got to just about everything. There's just a couple more, but I was like, you know what? We hit everything that we needed to. So, again, I appreciate it. And good luck with everything. We'll catch up with you soon.
Thanks, buddy. You too. We'll see you, man.